is an important question, and there is a lot of misunderstanding about where they are, because it's easy to believe that they are in the parks, that they are in the places that are well equipped with equipment for children. But actually, if you see it closely, most of the children are living in the peripheral areas of the city, areas where there is not equipment, where there is not really infrastructure from the public sector to these young people. But if you see it on a ratio about the total population, or really numbers, they're in the edges of the municipality. And most important, when you cross this information with the information about prosperity, about poverty, well, you see a fit. You see that actually those neighborhoods where you find more children are actually the neighborhoods where you find more poverty, less opportunities, less wealthy, and less employment, more single parent families, and so on. You know very well the rest of the story. So this is very useful information for a municipality like Zapopan, because this is a start point for choosing places where to start working, places where perhaps the first pilot projects should take place. And that's where we have been also working with, using the Growing Up in Cities methodology again. That means beyond this database available, also working with children, trying to see from their point of view if the place is as dark as it seems from data. And well, surprisingly, these children are great teachers as well for us as urban planners. They teach us that, well, yes, there are some problems, a lot of dirty, a lot of social problems in the neighborhoods, but also there are forests, there are lands of or pieces of mountains near, and those are the places that for them are the most important in the neighborhood. It's then possible to ask this community, these children, these youth people about ideas, what to change or what to keep, what to preserve in the neighborhood, or what to make evolve. And we work a little bit like a bridge between these children, their community, the university that is teaching urban planners, professionals, and also the municipality, the staff that is welcoming all this information. And this is a point where it's important to recall how fruitful could be a collaboration between municipalities and universities. Universities, we are, at least on my field in urban planning, we are trying to teach professionals, practitioners, and what a best way to teach them than being in a real situation with those that will be the employers later. And for municipalities, well, this kind of projects means a lot of changes, a lot of resources that they don't really have. So seeing us arriving with our volunteer or energy and our interest in working with them, it's a good news for them. It's a way for them to start new projects with actually no resources. And now coming back to the north, to Montreal, well, the situation is different. But there is also the importance of locating children that I want to highlight. In this work that we published 2 years ago, one of the chapters of my colleague Daniel Gill looks more detailed to demographic data, and what he found is well, this pattern that repeats from '96 now, that means 20 years ago. A pattern where, well, Montreal is a very attractive city for those starting university studies, with a lot of new incomers, new residents at these ages, at the early 20s, or up to 30 years old. And then what happens? Well, they get in couple, they get married, and they get kids, and then they get out of the city. It's not because they don't like living in downtown areas. Actually, they met in downtown areas. They know very well these downtown neighborhoods, but it's not affordable. It's not affordable given the sizes also of the apartments they are looking for. And that's the typical cycle of residential mobility with then new families getting outside and also their kids. And this is a particular problem in Montreal, since actually most of these urban resources for families, for kids, for children of different ages are concentrated downtown. So it's from, on the one hand, this concentration of resources, and on the other hand, this impossibility for families to stay there and to keep in touch with these resources. Downtown area, if you don't know, Montreal is this part of the city with most of the most important public transit offer and system concentrated. And families are more and more being concentrated here. This is the island of Montreal, and you will see later how actually families are even getting farther and farther. So this is useful information for the city, who is starting to planify the redevelopment of old industrial areas in terms of neighborhoods attractive for families. You can see in all the documents, all the graphic information of this kind of projects, how much they put the children and their families in the spot. And the biggest action or the most important action that municipality can take is working on public space, of course, on the public realm, and with vegetalization, with more quality of this landscape, and traffic calming, all these kind of measures that of course are quite interesting for parents who then should be more at ease with the idea of leaving our children playing outside. The problem is that actually this is also having an effect on the value of the land, and making these apartments even more expensive and more expensive. It's quite a difficult situation where, well, the municipalities in North America, and especially in Quebec, don't have the power of bringing affordable housing. And the only power they have, or the most important power they have in this context, is more in controlling those private developers in urban real estate. So the city has adopting or trying to get a bigger picture of it, and have more strong actions in order to develop this the stock of apartments with more than 2 bedrooms. And if you see now in the project that have been developed in these central downtown areas, well, you have typically 100 or 200 apartments buildings, and when you ask how many 3 bedrooms apartments do you have, well, they are 1 or 2, and these 2, well, are the penthouse, of course. So it's not really the kind of stock that is really affordable for families. So it's, the city is trying to develop a more powerful tools for making these private real estate developers to diversify their offer. And what is very inspiring is what is happening in Toronto. These are a couple of images from a presentation. The city of Toronto is living a similar situation, where actually there is already a lot of families living in 1 or 2 bedroom apartments in the downtown areas. And then, well, the idea of the city is to see how these families are hacking their apartments in order to adapt them to living with families, with kids, who's sleeping in the living room, or who's using the white leather couch in the entrance of the building as a playground, and what is really happening at different scales, at the scale of the apartment, scale of the building, the scale of the block, and the neighborhood. And I think this is also a smart approach to understand that there is a market, families are already living there, and from this analysis trying to produce some guidelines for these private actors that are producing apartments and that will still producing them, try to showing them, well, that actually they won't lose customers if they adapt this offer to more than one single kind of occupant in their apartments. Now we are arriving to the second part of this presentation about evidence-based urban planning, which actually is a funny statement because urban planning is supposed to be evidence-based, isn't it? But where do this evidence come from? We saw it comes from databases about where children are, where are they living, how far are them from urban resources. And the other set of information or evidence, very important in urban planning, is related to mobility, to daily mobility. And mobility, the problem is that it's a very complex phenomenon. It's hard to really grasp what mobility is in children for many reasons, because there is a huge diversity in daily mobility in terms of ages, of gender, in terms of family backgrounds and capacities as well. And mobility is a lot of it's a complex chain of trips that are together in a single routine. We were wondering this morning why is 43% of our trips less than 3 miles, I think it was. Why? It's because actually they are part of also this bigger chain. And if you see it at this scale, well, you realize how difficult could be to rely only on public transit, especially if public transit is not well developed in a neighborhood. So this is one of the reasons of the complexity of daily mobility. The other is that, well, actually the decision of a particular transportation mode comes from parents. This is a very useful model from Tracy Macmillan that puts parental decision at the center of this ecosystem of elements that result in a particular travel behavior in children. So when we want as urban planners to understand children behavior and to push some policies for fostering active transportation, well, it's important not to lose contact with parents, with the way they move. Another element that is very important for understanding children mobility is, of course, aging and the way these biographic events really shape our daily mobility. From the birth to, let's say, the 12th year of a life, we live very different environments. We practice very different places, and we also change a lot of our skills. A shift that I really look into that is very interesting for me is this one between the elementary school and the secondary school. Because, well, on the one hand, there is a big difference in terms of school management with very different catchment areas in these two education levels. And also because there is this representation in parents that, well, you have 12 years old now, you should go by yourself to school, or you should learn how to take the bus, and so on. This is all something that happens a lot, but another thing that happens a lot as well, and a colleague from France has documented, is a rise in accidents at this age, at the transition between primary and secondary school. One of the reasons is not really that children are not able to evaluate speeds or these mechanical elements of, trying to walk in the street, but because these are children that for most of their childhood were not exposed to risk situations, so they didn't learn how to deal themselves with situations, and then they are just in front of them without preparation. But this is an interesting transition between primary and secondary school, and what I would like to highlight here is how important in urban planning is also to work with other universes, the universe of education, which in Quebec, for instance, in Canada, is another government with other logics, other territories, other processes, and how important is this stakeholder in urban planning policies is something that perhaps is shared here also in North Carolina. But it's important to take in account these two actors in the same planning process. And you can see, based on data from the mobility survey in the Montreal metropolitan region, how from the end of primary school, the beginning of secondary school, there is a huge growth in public transit use, school bus a little bit, car passenger that falls a little bit, walking, only walking, because of course public transit means also a part of walking within a trip. And this is for the complete metropolitan region in Montreal. When you see it more in detail by areas, the number one, the central neighborhoods, the more old neighborhoods, and well, 7 and 6 as the farther areas. Some interesting and surprising things happen when you start analyzing that at this scale. First of all, a boring graphic. Nothing changes. It seems that nothing changes in terms of age groups or in terms of purposes for the trips. Well, something happens actually. 80% of the trips, of the daily trips for children between 12 and 15 are to school and back home. So an important part of the daily transportation is related to school. Again, the importance of working with schools. And the oldest group, 16, 17, that's where you start seeing more other purposes for the trips. Working, leisure, meeting friends, and so on. But the real changes are right here when you start seeing the model share for different ages and different areas. So for example, the central neighborhoods, what is striking is to see this gradual change. It's going really from the youngest to the oldest on a gradual evolution towards more and more public transit use during adolescence, let's say. And a very different portrait here, where we are in places where the public transit network is not as well developed. And what we see is that a high similarity. That means that actually these teenagers are maintaining the same mobility pattern for years and years and years. And what makes it change, of course you divine it, is the driving license. Driving license at 16 years old in Quebec is at least the end of purgatory, you can say it. And literally, for most of the adolescents I've been interviewing, they really explain it in this way. It's like they are suffering, but they have the hope that one day they will get 16 years old, and then there is a big change in their mobility habits. But what can we do as urban planners from this information? What we can understand is that central, more compact areas with more diversified opportunities for mobility and resources, more diversity, are places where youth learn on a more gradual way how to use the city, how to reach these resources, how to move themselves. So it's a more gradual learnership. And in those areas where, well, once it was interesting because it was no traffic and they were able to go to the primary school by foot. Yes, but they were able only to go to primary school by foot for the rest of their adolescence, and they are waiting for this 16-year anniversary to get out of this captivity. Based on a research project with a lot of interview, a more qualitative approach of research, what we found is that, well, and it's not useful anyway to say that outskirts neighborhoods or suburbia is not good for growing up and downtown areas are, or the opposite. We have this kind of urban environments anyway. We have more dense and less dense area, more central. The point, perhaps from a urban planning point of view, is what can we do to make them better? both downtown and suburban areas. We can learn from adolescents that in central areas we have this diversity that is important, and in peripheral areas we have also interesting landscape and interesting resources. What is to correct is the long distances and the scarcity of modal transportation options. So one idea comes from one suburban municipality in Quebec, Saint-Julie. They invented the 1217 taxi. It's a taxi only for youth between 12 and 17 years old. Perhaps you have something similar here? No? It's great. If you are between 12 and 17 years old, you call the taxi that works actually as a taxi, but also it's an hybrid. It's also like a public transit system. If they are 1 or 4 kids in the taxi, they split the price of the trip, and the trip within the municipality is $5, or outside the municipality is $7. But they can split it. So at the end, if you're 4, well, you finish, you end up paying 1 1/4. And for the municipality, this is a smart way to bring the population a public transit system at a fraction of the cost of a real public transit system that anyway wouldn't be as attractive for kids, because it wouldn't really offer the service at the times and to the destination that kids are really looking for. Now, the end part of the presentation, I wanted to talk about what to do, what kind of evidence. We have seen evidence about where kids are, where kids go, how do they move. And there is a lot of information in databases, but there is also a lot of information in kids. And it's important to take this information, because being youth, being adolescent, being a child, when I was it, when you were, when it's very different than being it now, today. And that's the reason why this qualitative information is so relevant, trying to grasp how they see the strengths and the weakness of their living environment and try to build from this reality. There is a lot of literature, a lot of methodology on how to get, as a practitioner in environmental design, whatever your field is, try to get this information. The one that I use is the one that Robin mentioned before, the methodology developed since the 70s by Kevin Lynch and then Shaula, Driscoll, and so on. Very useful and very funny, actually, activities that allow you to work with youth and to engage them actually in the urban planning process. Also, we can also divide these urban planning efforts in 3 families. There is the family of the comprehensive approach, where typically we would put forward a huge plan with a lot of dimensions, let's say housing, mobility, education, alimentation, and so on and so on and so on. And well, the strength of this approach is this effort to link together different realms and try to create synergies between different areas of development in a city. The weakness of this approach, of course, is, we say in Spanish, el que mucho abarca, poco aprieta. The one that wants to embrace a lot actually hooks not very strongly. If you translate it in English, which doesn't work very well. But the idea was that you got the idea. The weakness is that, of course, our municipalities don't have the resources to follow up with all this, with the same energy and with the same resources in all these different areas. So there's another family, the strategic approach, where you try to find the priority, the main axis where you are going to invest. It's important here to recall that having 15 or 16 priorities is like having no priority, actually. It's important to have really the kind of direction that is going to generate opportunities later on in order to act in other fields. The strength, of course, is this focus on one direction in one area. The weakness is that there is a lot of other areas that are also needing effort and are not really on the scope on the spot during the planning process. And there is a third approach, the tactic one, the opportunistic one. That means, well, what's happening? Where is the opportunity right now? And that's where we are going to invest. It's another approach. Which one of the three is the best? It's like asking what's better, a hammer or another tool. I don't know the names of tools. I didn't go to my lessons that day. So which one is best? Actually, the best is to have a big toolkit. The best would be really to be able to use one or the other depending on the context. So I would leave you only with this policy, a new policy, new adopted policy from last summer in the city of Montreal, the policy on children. And I'm actually struggling trying to find what kind of family it is from. I'm part of a team of researchers that are working with the municipality, trying to follow up this effort. And well, it's a policy with 5 axes. Is it comprehensive? So yes and no. There is attention on education, on culture, and health, on safety, transportation, accessibility. So it's kind of a comprehensive approach, but not really complete. It's not exhaustive. It's not strategic neither, because yes, there are only 5 axes, but 5 is already a lot of axes for a strategic approach. And I'm wondering actually also if it's an opportunistic or more tactical approach, because if you see the action plan after the policy, well, the action plan is an inventory of all the projects that are already there happening, and it's an effort to invest more in those projects that exist already, trying to put them farther or taking them more far. So it's a hybrid, perhaps, between these three approaches in urban planning. What is exciting is that at least something is happening, and that perhaps like the goal of this kind of activities, where the city of Montreal is trying to develop this children and youth reflex, the idea of thinking always on children and youth, whatever decision the city is taking. And it's not only decisions about parks, it's decisions about whatever dimension of the urban environment and urban management universe. So that's it. Congratulations, you survived to this minutes of annoying English, and I hope it was clear enough. But if it was not, I can answer questions with pleasure.